The night smelled like rain and regret, and Jonathan Pierce knew, deep in the quiet ache of his bones, that one wrong decision could shatter everything he had left. He stood under a flickering streetlight in downtown Cleveland, clutching his worn jacket tightly around himself as he watched his boss stumble out of the bar across the street. Her heels wobbled against the wet pavement, her laughter too loud, too careless, echoing into the emptiness of midnight. One misstep, one wrong encounter, and her life, like his once had, could spiral into something irreversible. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that even small acts can change lives, take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever helped someone when you didn't have to? Jonathan hadn't planned on staying late that night. He rarely did. His life was built on routines now, carefully constructed, fragile routines that revolved around his 6-year-old son, Caleb. Every evening was the same: pick Caleb up from Mrs. Henderson's apartment, cook something simple, help with homework, tuck him into bed with a story. Stability. Safety. Those were the promises Jonathan made after everything fell apart. But tonight, his boss, Rebecca Lawson, had insisted on celebrating a company deal. She was brilliant, intimidating, and completely untouchable during office hours. People admired her from a distance, feared her up close. Jonathan had always kept his interactions brief and professional. He couldn't afford distractions, especially not ones wrapped in sharp suits and sharper attitudes. He had planned to leave early. But then he saw her, hours later, stumbling out of that bar alone. Something inside him twisted. He could have walked away. No one would have blamed him. Rebecca was known for her icy demeanor, her ruthless decisions. She had fired people without blinking, dismissed concerns with a wave of her hand. Helping her wasn't expected. It wasn't required. But Jonathan had learned something the hard way: people at their worst were often one step away from losing everything. And he knew exactly what that felt like. Southwest He crossed the street. The rain had started to fall softly by the time he reached her. Rebecca didn't even notice him at first. She was trying to unlock her car, her hands trembling, keys slipping again and again. Her mascara had smudged, her confidence washed away in the quiet humiliation of the moment. Jonathan gently took the keys from her hand before she could drop them again. She looked up, confused, her sharp gaze blurred by alcohol and exhaustion. He didn't say much. He didn't judge. He simply guided her away from the driver's seat, ignoring her weak protests, and helped her into the passenger side. Then he closed the door carefully, walked around, and got behind the wheel. The drive was silent except for the sound of rain against the windshield. Rebecca gave him her address in fragments, words slurring together, and he pieced it together patiently. When they arrived, he helped her out again, steadying her as she nearly slipped on the wet steps leading to her apartment building. Inside, her home was pristine but cold, like a place meant to impress, not to live in. He didn't linger. He made sure she was safe, left a glass of water by her side, and quietly walked out without expecting anything in return. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just another act of kindness buried in the quiet corners of a difficult life. The next morning, Jonathan was late. Caleb had woken up with a fever, his small body burning with heat, his sleepy eyes filled with discomfort. Jonathan had spent hours tending to him, torn between staying home and risking his job or leaving and risking something far worse, the trust of his son. In the end, he brought Caleb to Mrs. Henderson's with extra instructions and rushed to work, his heart heavy with guilt. When he arrived, the office felt different. Quieter. Colder. People were whispering. Jonathan's stomach tightened as he made his way to his desk. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He already knew. Rebecca. Had she remembered? Or worse, had she decided to pretend she didn't? His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she would deny everything. Maybe she would twist the situation. Maybe she would see his help as an intrusion, an overstep. He had seen people protect their pride at the cost of others before. He sat down, trying to focus, but every passing second felt heavier than the last. Then his phone buzzed. A message from HR. Rebecca Lawson wants to see you. Immediately. The words hit like a hammer. Around him, the whispers grew louder. Jonathan stood slowly, his legs feeling heavier than they should. Every step toward her office felt like walking into something he couldn't undo. He knocked once. Her voice came from inside, steady and controlled. "Come in." When he opened the door, Rebecca was sitting behind her desk, perfectly composed. No smudged mascara. No sign of last night's vulnerability. She looked exactly like the woman everyone feared. For a moment, Jonathan thought he had imagined everything. Then she looked up at him, and something in her eyes shifted. It wasn't cold. It wasn't distant. It was human. She stood up slowly, and for a brief second, the room felt smaller. Jonathan braced himself. But what came next wasn't what he expected. Rebecca didn't pretend to forget. She didn't dismiss what had happened. Instead, she acknowledged it, fully, openly, without hiding behind her authority. She spoke quietly, her voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. She told him she remembered everything. The rain. The car. The way he didn't say a word that could make her feel smaller than she already did. She admitted something else too, something no one in that office had ever heard from her. She said she had been falling apart. The deal they had celebrated wasn't just business. It had come at a cost: long nights, pressure, isolation. She had been holding everything together for so long that she didn't realize how close she was to breaking. And last night, she had broken. Jonathan listened, unsure of where this was going. Then she did something no one expected. She thanked him. Not as a boss. Not as someone above him. But as a person who had been seen, helped, and protected when she couldn't protect herself. And then she did something even more unexpected. She asked about Caleb. Jonathan blinked, caught off guard. She had noticed. The late arrivals. The early exits. The way he always checked his phone, always carried a quiet urgency. He hesitated, but something about her tone made it easier to answer. He told her everything. About his wife, Rachel, who had passed away 3 years ago after a sudden illness. About the nights he spent learning how to braid hair, cook meals, and soothe nightmares. About the fear of losing his job, the constant balancing act between being a good father and a reliable employee. Rebecca listened in silence. And when he finished, the room felt different. Less like an office. More like a place where something real had happened. That afternoon, everything began to change. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was undeniable. Jonathan's workload was adjusted, quietly, without announcements. Flexible hours appeared where there had been none. Support he hadn't asked for started showing up in small, meaningful ways. Rebecca didn't turn into a different person overnight. She was still sharp, still driven. But there was something new beneath it all. Understanding. Respect. And maybe even gratitude. Weeks passed, and the ripple effect of that one night spread further than Jonathan could have imagined. Rebecca began treating her team differently. Meetings became less about pressure and more about clarity. Mistakes were addressed, but not with the same cold detachment. People noticed. The office changed. And Jonathan, who had once felt invisible, found himself seen. Not because he demanded it. But because he had earned it in the quietest, most human way possible. At home, Caleb got better. The fever passed, replaced by laughter, small drawings taped to the fridge, and bedtime stories that stretched longer than they needed to. One evening, as Jonathan tucked Caleb into bed, his son looked up at him with sleepy eyes and asked a simple question. "Daddy, are you happy?" Jonathan paused. For a long time, happiness had felt like something distant, something fragile. But now it felt possible again. He smiled softly and nodded. "Yes, buddy. I think I am." If this story is touching your heart so far, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this remind us that kindness still matters. And before we reach the end, I have a small request: comment the word kindness if you believe one small act can change someone's life. Because sometimes, it really does. Months later, Jonathan stood outside that same bar. The rain wasn't falling this time. The streetlight still flickered. But everything felt different. Rebecca walked out beside him, completely steady this time, her presence calm and grounded. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Because both of them knew what had changed. One night. One decision. One act of kindness that could have been ignored, but wasn't. And in choosing to help, Jonathan hadn't just saved his boss from trouble. He had unknowingly reshaped both of their lives. Not with grand gestures. Not with recognition. But with something far more powerful. Compassion. And as he walked away, heading home to the life he had rebuilt piece by piece, he realized something simple, yet profound. Sometimes, the people we help don't just remember. Sometimes, they change. And sometimes, they help change us right back. If this story moved you even a little, don't scroll away. Like, comment, and share it so more people can feel what you just felt. Because in a world that often forgets, stories like this remind us of something we should never lose, our humanity.